We live on a blue planet. 90% of it is covered in deep blue ocean, and it's a space that's full of all sorts of wonderful creatures. Now, this evening, I'm going to tell you about one group of creatures, and they are some of the toughest, the smartest, the oldest, not to mention some of the strangest things that live in the sea. And luckily, they leave parts of themselves behind that we can find. And we can learn things about their wonderful lives down beneath the waves by looking at these bits of themselves. And I'm talking, of course, about seashells. Seashells like this fabulous thing. This is a triton. Here's a picture of what it looked like when it was alive. It's a type of sea snail. This one in particular lives on coral reefs. It trumps around on its yellow foot. If you can see in the picture, the shell is beautiful, but even in life, I think it's even more beautiful than what it looks like when we can hold its fabulous shell like this. Now, this triton is just one of the many mollusks in the world. And these, I have to say, I think, are the champions of shell making in the oceans. Now, there are lots of other creatures that make shells. There are crabs and shrimp and lobsters. They have shells, and that's fine. There are sea urchins. There are tiny plankton that make shells. But I think that mollusks are the champion shell makers. They make such beautiful, beautiful shells out of calcium carbonate, basically the same stuff as chalk. So that's what I'm going to tell you about tonight. Is I'm going to lift the lid on the wonderful lives of the sea mollusks and tell you something about all the things we know. So to begin with, their shells, as I said, are calcium carbonate. They keep them their whole lives long. So a mollusk will have a shell that it will grow as a baby, and you can actually see the shell it would have had when it was a tiny baby, because it's generally, for these spiraling shells, the snail shells, it's the innermost whorl. That was its baby shell. And you can see that in any of these shells we've got here. And the animal inside, as it grew bigger, will have basically expanded the shell around itself. It has a layer of tissue called the mantle, a soft layer of its body covered in this thing called the mantle, which makes the shell, creates the shell out of calcium carbonate, which it gets from its food and from the seawater, and it spins these beautiful spirals around itself as the animal inside gets bigger. Now, we tell all sorts of stories about seashells, and one in particular is that you can hear the sound of the sea inside a seashell. In particular, big shells like this triton, and also this lovely one here, which is a helmet shell. But I'm not sure. What do you think? Do you want to have a see? Can you hear the sound of the sea inside that? I want someone to try the big one as well. Who wants to try the triton? Want to have a go at the triton? Now, can you hear? Put it to your ear. Can you hear the sea? What can you hear inside there? Not really. No. How about that one over there? What can you hear inside that? Does it sound interesting? Do you have sort of whooshing, swooshing sounds? Yeah, it's an interesting idea that you can hear the sound inside a shell. And actually, you can get a similar effect if you can use a cup, like a mug, that will give you the same effect. Or even just cup your ears around your hands, rather. If you cup your hands around your ear, you can sort of hear the same sort of, maybe a sort of shushing sound if you use both of them. What's going on is it's not the sea. Is the fact that this is such a big shell and it's a hard inner surface with a great big chamber inside. It's acting like a resonating chamber. So what's happening is that the sound waves all around your head in the room of people shuffling next to you, even the sounds of the blood coursing through your ears, is being funneled into that chamber, and they're bouncing around inside, and it's producing a sound which ultimately does sound a little bit maybe like waves breaking on a distant beach, perhaps, or something like that. That's what people say. So it's because of the way that the sound waves behave inside a shell, and that's why we think that they have the sea inside them. Now, it's the same piece of science or physics, really, explaining that phenomena that means that some shells make great musical instruments. Now, this is a conch. You might recognize it if you've read the book Lord of the Flies, and they had a conch shell in that, and it was a very important figure in the book for the boys who were washed up on a desert island, and they turned theirs into a trumpet. I'm not going to turn this triton into a trumpet tonight because the museum would probably be a bit upset because I'd have to cut the end off, though maybe that would be worth it. But that's what you would do to turn something like this into a trumpet. You cut the end off and then blow it really like a normal trumpet, like a brass instrument. And the same thing is happening. You're using your lips to vibrate the air inside the shell. It's bouncing around inside that chamber and producing a sound that basically sounds, well, it should sound similar to a normal trumpet. I'm not going to try it tonight, but I found some clips on YouTube of people having a go at shell trumpets, and let's see what they got up to.
Here you saw Matt Flynn. That's a message he's going to get to everybody.
So like an elephant dying.
Yeah, it does sound a bit like an elephant dying. That one wasn't very good, I don't think. But I think this next guy, I think he got the hang of it a bit better. So another conch trumpet. So there you go. If you know how to do it, you can make quite a nice sound with a shell trumpet. That's what's going on there. So these are mollusks. The triton, the conch are all types of lovely mollusks. And there are loads of different creatures come within this group of sea creatures. Lots of sea snails. We've got lots of snails in front of us here. And you can all come and have a look at them afterwards and touch them if you want to have a play. There are cowrie shells, cone shells, lots of lovely snails. Here's a picture of another lovely sea snail, a moon snail. And that orangey skirt is its mantle that's sticking out from its body, which is that tissue that makes its shell. A big group of the mollusks are the ones that have shells in two halves. And I've got some scallop shells here. Lots of the bivalves, these are, the ones with shells in two pieces, the ones we eat. They're scallops, mussels, cockles, oysters, things like that. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you can find them with the shells still attached. Can we switch on the visualizer for a second, please? And we'll just have a look at that one. See if we can get that. Can you see how it's basically got both of its shells still intact? So that's a kind of cockle. It's lovely. There we go. Thank you very much. We can go back to the clam. And this picture is a giant clam. So the Natural History Museum does have a giant clam shell. And I asked if I could borrow it, but they said we need a forklift truck to get it over here because it's huge. It's about this big and weighs about the same as 2 baby elephants. So I said, fine, we won't take that. So they can be absolutely enormous, these bivalves. And you can see in this picture that what you can actually see in this living clam is the mantle sticking out of its shells, and it's beautiful colours, quite brightly coloured giant clams can be. And the reason it is that they have single-celled algae living inside their tissue. And it's a symbiosis. So the algae and the clam both benefit from this. The algae are harnessing sunlight to make sugars. They're photosynthetic. And some of those sugars that they make seep out into the clam and they get some food. And the algae gets somewhere nice and safe to live inside the clam. So it's a sort of two-way thing. And that's how they get their beautiful colours. And there are myths talked about giant clams, about people getting stuck inside them and drowning with maybe a leg or an arm stuck inside of one. But in my experience, that would be virtually impossible. Clams do have eyes. Along the edge of their mantle, they have little eyes. So they can sense if something is coming. And they generally don't want to have an encounter with a person. So they will close their clam shells quite gently and slowly and way before you get anywhere near it. So I really don't think they can be man killers. I think that's definitely a story that's not true. So there's wonderful bivalves. Those are also some mollusks we have. Another group of the mollusks are the Kevlar Pods. So these are mollusks that don't have shells, although this octopus here is trying to pretend that it does because it's borrowed a clam shell from another mollusk that's already dead. And that's a cuttlefish at the top. This also includes the squid and various other soft-bodied mollusks. I spent the summer in Madagascar, and here's a video I shot of an octopus I met. They are wonderful, wonderful creatures. They are incredibly clever and intelligent in the way they use the oceans and the lives that they lead. And they're just quite mesmerizing to watch them too, with the way they swim and change their colors. It was red initially, and then it changed color. And I couldn't help wondering what it was thinking as it buried itself in the sand and was looking at me. It was in very shallow water. It was only about this deep. And that orange funnel is it breathing. It's sucking in water and breathing it out again. It's a really wonderful creature, so I enjoyed that very much. Mollusks live just about everywhere. No matter where you are in the world, you're never far from a mollusk. When you're in the ocean, they live from the very deepest depths of the ocean up through the open water onto the shallow shores around the land. This is a mollusk. It was discovered not very long ago, living miles beneath the sea on a hydrothermal vent. So these are amazing structures that form in cracks in the seabed, where you have boiling hot water gushing up from underneath, forming black smoke as these tall chimneys. And it's an extreme place to live. And we're talking miles beneath the waves. It's totally dark. Very high pressure, all sorts of chemicals. It's very caustic and a difficult place to live. And yet life does thrive down there. And these things, the scaly foot snails, are one of the many species of creature. And lots of mollusks live on hydrothermal vents. And these are really weird creatures. They have shells made of iron. They're the only animals we know in the world that have iron-based shells, which is fantastic. And their feet are covered in these sort of iron scales, which is where they get their name from, the scaly foot snails. And they survive by similar symbiosis as the giant clams I mentioned. They don't have algae in their tissues because there's no sunlight. That would be useless for them. But what they have is bacteria that can make food from the chemicals in the water. They are so-called chemosynthetic rather than photosynthetic. And they harness energy from things like sulfur that comes up through these black smokers. And they basically farm the bacteria inside them and use the food that they make to survive. So that's absolutely a bizarre and extreme place to live. You can also find mollusks on land. I should probably mention this. We're here to talk about the sea, but mollusks have evolved life on land. Slugs and snails in your garden, they're mollusks. You'll find them living in trees, at the tops of mountains, in deserts, and deep underground. So really the only thing that mollusks haven't learnt to do and haven't evolved to do is to fly like a bird through the sky. But they pretty much live anywhere else. But also discovering loads more mollusk species. And there are people who specialize in going out to try and find as many as possible. Now this picture, which I love, it was taken just last year. These are new species of snails, mostly snails, and there's a clam in there as well. And they're all under 5 millimeters in length, so they're about the size or smaller than my little fingernail. They're all found in Papua New Guinea by a team from the Natural History Museum in Paris, led by a guy called Philippe Boucher. And he specializes in finding new mollusks. And they go out, they make collections, mostly in places in the tropics where you get so many species. And they bring them back. And what they find is that actually there aren't enough people who specialize in these tiny mollusks to give them all names. And we desperately need scientists to specialize in these wonderful, diverse animals so we can describe them, give them names, and understand the incredible diversity of mollusks. And it's Philippe Boucher, the guy who helped collect these. And I asked him, okay, so how many mollusks do you think there are? How many species do you think there are in the world, including all the ones we haven't yet found? And he thinks, and I think he's the one who should know, he collects them and he finds new species, he thinks there could be 200,000 species of mollusk, including all the ones we still have to discover. And to put that in context, there are about 5,000 species of mammals, so us and all the other warm-blooded creatures with fur and hair and stuff. So 5,000 mammals, 200,000 mollusks. They are an incredible group of creatures. But you don't have to go to the tropics or somewhere exotic to the deep ocean to find wonderful mollusks. In fact, one of my favorite places to go mollusk spotting is on the beaches around Britain. In particular, in between the tides on rocky shores. When the tide goes out, you can find some wonderful creatures. And just earlier this year, I was in Devon with a group of undergraduates, students from Cambridge, and I took some video footage down a microscope, not a very high-powered microscope, but just wanted to give you an idea of some of the smaller creatures. And here's some of the things we found. This is a Blu Ray Limpet. They live on giant seaweeds called kelp, and they've got these beautiful blue lines down their backs. This is a chiton, another group of mollusks that have their shells in plates. They have 8 plates along their back, and they can roll up if they feel that they're being attacked. This is a type of sea slug, one of the sea creatures that have lost their shells. Here's another sea slug. And this particular one does something very cool. They eat sea anemones, which are relatives of jellyfish. And like jellyfish, sea anemones have stings, stings, and these sea slugs can eat the anemones without firing those stings, and they keep them in their stomachs and then put them in those grey finger-like things along their backs, and use those same stings to defend themselves. So that's pretty cool. And here's another sea slug, a bright orange one. All of these that we just found on the shore in Devon, they have these things that look like ears at the front. They're actually called Rhino Fours, and they use them to sense chemicals in the water and to find their way around. They do look quite like ears. And at the back end is their gills, the feathery bit sticking up at the back of a sea slug is its gills. It breathes through the water. And that's where they get their name from, because they're actually called nudibranchs, is the name we could give them, which means naked gill, because their gills stick out. You might have seen pictures of this nudibranch, this sea slug. Did anyone see this over the summer? It kind of went viral on YouTube, on the internet. The Sea Bunnies, as they were nicknamed. Very, very cute. Jaruna parva. They were originally discovered in Japan. I think it was some Japanese people who put lots of photos up of them. And they're very cute things. But now you know that those aren't actually ears sticking up, but they are these things called Rhino Fours, and sea slugs use them to sense the world around them, not by listening, but by sniffing for chemicals. Because in the sea, that's really important. You get a lot of smells washing around. Tells you where your food is, tells you if a predator is coming to get you. So, that's just an introduction to some of the lovely mollusks that we have in the oceans. And when we look at the shells that they leave behind, the homes that they live in, there's an awful lot that we can learn to read from those shells that tells us about the lives that they led. And it's quite fun to sort of learn some of the secret clues as to what you can look at a shell and figure out, okay, this teaches me, I learned something about what the animal did when it was alive, or when it was dead. Now, in this photograph, I took this on a beach in the Gambia in West Africa. And there are signs, if you learn how to read this picture, there are signs that tell you how several of the shells, the mollusks in this picture, how they died. If you see there's a little dot there, there's a dot hole there, and there's another one there. And these are all, I think they're actually all bivalves. Yeah, they're all bivalves. So those two twin-shelled mollusks. And they have all been eaten by another mollusk, by a sea snail that drills a hole in shells like that and sucks out the insides. So if you've been to the beach and you've collected shells, you may have found them with these little holes, little round holes in them, and thought, oh, that'll make a nice necklace, because you can thread I always used to find them when I was a kid and think, oh, that's nice, a nice little round hole. It's actually one that's been eaten by another mollusk. And I think it's a bit brutal, but it's a wonderful insight into the ecology of mollusks and what's going on in the sea and how they're eating each other, they're preying on each other, and there are signs they leave behind. So yes, there are sea snails that have teeth, which they use to grind a hole in other shells and then eat what's inside. So that's wonderful. Now, you can also look at shells, and you can actually work out by looking at them which ones are the hunters and which ones are the ones that probably are more likely to have been hunted, like these guys. Now, if you look at quite a few of these shells here, we'll see that they have a long notch, they have a bit of a notch in their shell. If you can see that, there's a kind of a notch at the bottom of it. On that one, in fact, this one's quite a good one as well. You can see there's a long notch coming down inside its shell. And if you look even at tiny shells, you'll see the ones that have these notches. And this one has one too. There we go, it's got a notch here. Now that tells you that this was a predator, and all of these other ones were predators, because along that notch is where they have, it's a piece of their body called it's like a proboscis, a long nose basically, will stick out of that bit of the shell, and it will sniff out prey, and it can also act as a way of catching prey. Now next picture I'm going to show you, is a thing called the Cooper's nutmeg snail. Now, they have a notch in their shell, so they're predators, but they're a very particular kind of predatory snail. They will spend most of the day hidden in the sand, in the sea. They live off the coast of California, but at night they will wake up, and they will come out of the sand, and they will roam around and hunt for a sleeping shark. And it is true that some sharks do sleep and they can sit on the seabed. They don't have to keep swimming to breathe. That's not true. Or a sleeping fish. So it creeps up on a sleeping fish or a shark. And and it reaches up with its proboscis, which can be 3 times the length of its body. These are quite small snails, but they have very long proboscis. They reach up to the shark. At the end of its proboscis is a little tooth, which they cut a little hole, and then they suck its blood. So these are basically blood-sucking snails. They're the mosquitoes of the ocean. That's pretty cool. As I said, the Triton here has a notch. This is definitely a hunting shell. Back to the picture of it here. You can just about see its proboscis sticking out. Now, the Tritons, what they hunt are starfish. That's their favourite food, are starfish. In particular, a thing called a Crown-of-Thorns Starfish, which are enormous. They're great big things, covered in nasty-looking poisonous spines. But somehow the Triton is immune to the poisons. It doesn't get stung. And what they will do, I think you're going to get a bit of an idea of this from what I already said about the drilling snails, but the Tritons will clamber on top of a Crown-of-Thorns starfish, chew a hole in its skin, and suck out its insides. So they are lovely things. Some scientists have done some studies of how a Crown-of-Thorns starfish reacts when a Triton is within reach, to show just how scared they are, basically. I mean, you don't really think of a starfish as being something with emotions, but these things really do get scared when a Triton is close by. And here's a video shot by the Australian Institute of Marine Science, showing a little experiment that they did, putting Crown-of-Thorns starfish. So these are the starfish. There you go. They wanted to find out if they exposed the starfish to water that had been passing over one of these guys, compared to water that didn't have a shell in it. And we'll see the setup here. So you've got 2 tanks, one with a shell, one without a shell, and they're being fed into tanks that contain 2 Crown-of-Thorns starfish. And you can see the one with the black line, that's the one that has normal water, and the one with the white line is the one, he's terrified! This is sped up. It's a bit faster, they don't move that fast, but basically he's getting out of there if he can. He's trying to climb out of the tank and escape the smell, which is incredible, isn't it? So they really know to avoid these guys. I would too if I was a Crown-of-Thorns starfish, to be honest. So that's wonderful. Now, so there's a lot we can learn from looking at shells. And in fact, the next thing I want to tell you about shells, really, it's something that links shells to ourselves. Now, I want to take a bit of a poll in the audience. So it's going to be hands up. I want to know, first of all, how many of you are right-handed? Now, I'm right-handed. Stick your right hands up. Wow. That's just about everyone, I think. Up there, yes, hello. Everyone's right-handed, brilliant. Okay. Left-handers. How many left? Oh, hello, that's excellent. Got a few over here, smattering. None in the middle, by the sounds of no one's there. Over here as well. So really, most of us are right-handed, and just a few of us are left-handed. Strangely, a similar sort of thing happens with shells. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand some shells out. Okay, that one's for you. Perhaps your dad can help you with that one. I'm going to give you a shell. Oh, you have a shell. There we go. Hold that one. Just a second. I'm going to hand some more out. Let's see. That one. And that one. How about over here? Would you like a shell? There we go. Here we go. Can I give it to you? There we go. There's one there. Thank you. I think we should do some over here in the middle. Would you like a shell? There we go. I'll bring you one back. Let's just get some more. Those ones aren't so good. Yeah, that one will do. That one's good. Okay, 3 more. Who wants a shell? There we go. You do have to give these back at the end, I'm afraid. And then the museum would be pretty unhappy if I gave them all away. Let's put one more up here. Oh, can you share? There we go. All right. Excellent. So what I want you to do is, I need you to hold your shells with the pointed end, and hopefully you have got a pointed end in most of yours, downwards, and facing you. So you're looking at your shell with the point downwards, and I want you to tell me which way the opening is facing. So this one, the Triton shell, you can see the point's downwards, and the opening is coming out to the right. So that's a right-handed shell. So I'm going to ask each of you with shells to do this and to tell me, maybe if you need some help, get someone next to you to tell me which way your shell is facing. Okay, so down here, what's yours? Right, excellent.
Left.
Yours is left, is it?
I'm not sure.
No, that's right. So it's like you point it downwards and it's opening that way. So, okay, excellent. Another right. Brilliant. What about up here?
I think this is left.
You think this is left? I'm going to have to check that one as well. Maybe it's a little bit tricky to see. No, it's right. So you've got the point coming down, and then this is opening that way, which is to the right. But good one. So another right. Who else has got shell? Right. You think that one's right? Point that one down. It's left. That one actually is the left one. We'll come back to that. Okay, who else has got shells? What's your one?
Right.
Yours is right. Brilliant. I'll take that one back. Got another one here?
It's right.
That's a right. Excellent. Yes, that is a right. Wonderful. And over here, what have you got? You've got another right. Lovely. It's a bit broken. That's all right. What's yours?
It's right.
You think it's a right? Yep, that's a right. What about this one? Which way is this going? Is it right or left?
Right.
You think it's a right? Yep, that's another right. Brilliant. Have I got all my shells back? Has anyone else got a shell? Oh, sorry. There's one over here. What have you got there? Oh, that one. We did that one, didn't we? Yes, that's the right. Brilliant. Okay, so another one here. Did you tell me which one was that?
Right.
That was a right. Yes. So they are basically all right. This is the one I planted, which is a left-handed. I hope you can all see that. With its point going downwards, it does face to your left. So if I'm looking at it here, it's coming to the left. Pretty much. So the same proportion of shells of mollusks that have spiraling shells are right-handed, or if you're looking from them at the top, so you can see these ones in the picture here, it's whether if they curl clockwise, that's the same as it being right-handed, or anti-clockwise would be the opposite way. But about 90% of shells, a similar proportion of people who are right-handed, shells are also right-handed. And it's kind of a strange phenomenon. The coiling in shells is controlled by a gene, and it's a very ancient gene which also controls parts of the human body being in different positions. Like we have our hearts on the left-hand side, and it's the same gene that controls the way that shells either go one way or the other. But in shells and mollusks, we can understand that actually what matters isn't really whether it's left or right, but that really what you need, what's happened, is that pretty much all the shells are the same. So whether it's left or right is not so important, but the fact that they all match is important. And it comes down to this. To mating, basically. So mollusks, these are land snails, but the same things go on in the sea. Mollusks some of them have separate sexes. There are males and females. There are lots of hermaphrodites. Each individual has both male and female parts, but they will still mate and exchange sperm and fertilize eggs. And as well as the shells spinning in a certain direction, the rest of their bodies are also asymmetric. And it's very important for the success of an encounter between a male and a female or two hermaphrodite mollusks for their body parts to match in a face-to-face encounter. And most of them do mate face-to-face. And the male mollusks have a penis set off to the side, and the females have their opening set off to the side, the pore it's called, and they have to match. So it's a little bit like if I were to try and shake someone's hand. Well, if we go to shake hands and we both put our right hands, and that's fine. But if we go to shake hands and I put my left hand out, that doesn't work. So you have to be putting out the same hand to shake hands. Mollusks need to both be right, have the right coiling shells. If a right coiling snail and a left coiling snail try to mate, the bits don't fit, basically. And lots of studies have shown that the upshot is not very many babies. And that's very important in the natural world. You want to have babies. That's kind of the point, is to have as many babies as possible. So what you need are, for all the populations of shells and snails, to be either right coilers or left coilers. And the ones that are left coiling at the moment, it just happens to be that there are mostly right coilers, and the left coilers are the ones that tend to find it hard to find a suitable mate, and they get left out a bit, and so there aren't so many of them. But there are a few places in the world where there are lots of left coiling mollusks. And actually, I'm just going to stop that for a second. And some researchers from Kyoto University in Japan went to some islands in the south of Japan and found lots and lots of snails, admittedly land snails, ones that live in trees called satsuma snails, and loads of them are left coilers. And they thought, what is going on? Why are there so many left coilers? Surely they're going to have this problem of finding a mate. But this is the explanation. So the Satsuma snails are hunted by these snakes. These are snail hunting snakes, and they creep up. This is the nighttime footage. They creep up behind a snail. And this is a bit gory, but I'm sure you can manage. This is all about death today, isn't it? So they sneak up behind. So this is a snake attacking a right coiling Satsuma snail. And as you can see, it's pretty successful. He's managed to get his jaws into the coil of the snail. And the snake has asymmetric jaws too, and it's evolved to be able to eat a right coiling snail. Now this is what happens when it tries to eat a left coiling snail. It sort of gets a grip, but it's having trouble. It can't get its jaws into the hole because it's facing the other way. And ultimately, the snail survives. This is the good bit of the story. The left coiling snail, off it goes. It drops the snail, can't eat it. So because of this strange predation by these snakes, the left coiling snails survive more than the right coiling ones. So they have this extra advantage, which means there's more of them, they survive, and they can find mates, which is the key thing. So there are situations where there are lefters, but mostly in the world at the moment, it's right coiling snails, which is rather wonderful. Now, so we've been talking so far about mollusks that live inside beautiful seashells, which we've had a look at. But mollusks aren't the only animals that live inside shells. There are other creatures too that give this a go. And it's quite easy to find these animals. If you go down to the beach around Britain and you go look in rock pools, and all you have to do is watch out for a seashell behaving quite strangely. I don't know if you can spy. There's a seashell in this picture which is not really sliding along slowly like a snail, because actually inside its shell is a crab. This is a hermit crab. And you can quite easily find hermit crabs in rock pools around Britain. Just look out for the ones that are scuttling really fast. And lo and behold, inside is a hermit crab. So these are crabs that live inside empty, dead seashells. Here's a picture here of another one. They live in all sorts of different shapes. There's another lovely one there. And here's a little video of what hermit crabs spend a lot of their time doing, is swapping shells. And they can just lift their bottoms out of a shell and jump into another one that they might like the look of. Because if you can imagine, normal crabs that make their own shells, if they need a bigger shell, what they will do is shed their old one, cast that one aside, and make a new one of their own, one size bigger, so they can grow bigger. But hermit crabs don't make their own shells. They, as I say, they actually lost the ability to make shells, and they borrow shells from mollusks. If they want to get bigger, they need to find a new shell. So hermit crabs spend a lot of their time, at least the ones in the sea, spend a lot of their time walking around trying to find the next size shell for them to move into, and trying them out and seeing how it goes. Now, there are 12 species of hermit crab that live actually on beaches, so they spend a lot of their time out of the sea. And there are far fewer seashells for them to find. I mean, we do find seashells on the beach, but when it comes to being a hermit crab, homes are hard to come by. So you'll find that those beach crabs tend to have interesting encounters with each other. They will steal each other's shells. If they think that the other shell from another hermit crab looks quite nice, they'll come along and beat their claws on top of the shell as hard as they can until the occupant decides he's had enough and leaves, and then takes the new shell. So that's nice. I should say that hermit crabs don't ever kill mollusks. They don't ever kill the snails inside the shells to use them. They only, for some reason, they only ever use already empty shells. And actually the ones that live in the sea hermit crabs, they respond to the smell of mollusks being eaten. So a bit like those starfish that were scared of tritons, hermit crabs love the smell of sea snails being eaten, and they will congregate where snails are being hunted, because they know any minute now there's going to be an empty shell once it's been eaten by something else, and it can move in. But on land, as I say, there's fewer shells, and people have done lots of studies of hermit crabs to understand what goes on there, and they have found that on beaches, hermit crabs can actually be quite social, and they can have parties. Now, what happens if you put a brand new, maybe quite a nice big shell, an empty shell on a beach near to some hermit crabs, and you pop that down, and a hermit crab probably sooner or later will wander along and have a look at it, and it will go, oh, okay, and it will climb over it and take a look and see if it's the right sort of shell for it. But if it's too big, and they often are too big, and if the crab is too small, having a big shell is useless because it can't carry it around. It's too heavy and too easy to fall out, or for some predator to pull it out. So you want a shell that fits. So if it's too big, the hermit crab will simply sit next to the shell, quietly waiting for a bit. For up to a day, just sits there. And then probably more hermit crabs will come along, because this is in areas where there are lots of crabs. So more will come along and they'll wonder what's going on. And then they might have a look at the shell and say, no, it's too big for me. And they also will sit and wait. And then a party breaks out. But don't get too excited, really, because what happens in hermit crab parties is they generally form queues. Maybe the Brits would like that, I don't know. We do love to queue, don't we? So what will happen, basically, is that the hermit crabs will arrange themselves around this shell in a size-ordered queue, with the biggest ones at one end and the smallest ones at the other end, all the way along. And if there's loads of hermit crabs, then they'll form multiple queues. So maybe there'll be 3 or 4 queues around one big shell. And they're waiting for a big hermit crab to turn up to kind of take the shell itself. And the little ones at the edge of the queues, they'll jump queues. Like, you know, when you're in the supermarket and you can't decide which queue to go to. And you're like, well, maybe that one. Oh, wait, no, that one's going quicker. I'm going to go over here. And hermits do the same thing. They kind of hedge their bets on, oh, he looks like they're going to win the shell. Because ultimately what happens is one of the queues will get that empty shell. They will win possession of the shell, and then the biggest crab moves into that one, and then the next biggest crab moves into the one that's been emptied, and it goes on down the line. And everyone gets a new shell, at least in that line. So it's actually a very efficient way of distributing shells amongst all the crab population. And it's a similar thing happens when people buy houses, and there's like a housing chain, basically. That's what's going on with crabs. So they're very cool. And if you watch very carefully, you might see this happening. So you can go and see hermit crabs on beaches, as I say. They're easy to see around the British Isles, go to your favourite beach and just sit and watch, and they all fight over their shells, and all sorts of crazy things will happen with hermit crabs. Now, hermit crabs have been using mollusk shells for a very long time. This is a picture of a hermit crab inside an Ammonite shell. And this is a mollusk. This particular one was about 130 million years ago. This was a hermit crab living inside a very ancient type of mollusk. And these are really a wonderful group of creatures, the Ammonites. And they ruled beneath the waves, really, for hundreds of millions of years. I've got here, actually, could we go on to the this thing, the projector thing. I have here this is a fossil of an ammonite, which I brought back from Madagascar this summer. I didn't find it, but I did buy it from, there's loads of fossils in Madagascar. And this is an ammonite that was alive about 150 million years ago, so I can put that there and give it a look. Really, but 2 of them, obviously, there's 2 ammonites there. This one is from the mid-Cretaceous, so about 150 million years old. And there were thousands of species of ammonites that lived in the oceans. And these are mollusks that mostly live inside these spiraling shells. They lived in the oceans, all through the seas, all around the world. You can find ammonites. If you've ever been to Dorset, can we go back to the slides? Sorry. If you've ever been to Dorset, to Lyme Regis, you might have seen there are ammonite shells in the rocks there, fossils of ammonites. Here's one I found. That's my foot in the picture. So they can be really big. But they can be even bigger than that. That illustration of that first one, that's called Parapososia. It's an ammonite that lived about 100 million years ago. And that was 3 meters in diameter. So if you look down, I'm sure you can all see the semicircle of the floor here. That's 3 meters. So this ammonite was basically, it wouldn't have quite fit in this whole floor of the lecture theatre. They were absolutely enormous. Wonderful, wonderful creatures. They didn't all have spiraling shells. Some of them had strange-shaped shells, like this one. Did all sorts of strange coiling things. Now, there are a couple of big mysteries about ammonites that we still don't really have a good answer for. And the first is what they looked like. We've got loads of shells that we found, like the one I've got in Madagascar, loads of fossils of their shells, but never has anyone found a fossil of the soft parts of an ammonite, so we don't know what their bodies looked like. All of these pictures are really just reconstructions based on what we think they might have looked like based on modern relatives of theirs. So they are relatives. We know that they're close relatives of octopus and squid. They're the Kevlar Pods. And these are 2 drawings from a recent science paper that's kind of a fairly good guess at what ammonites did look like. We do have evidence they had stripy shells. We think they probably had tentacles and siphon like an octopus. But we are really just guessing because no one actually has found, weirdly, we haven't found a proper fossil of an ammonite, even though there's millions of them around the world. The other big question about ammonites is why there are no longer any ammonites in the oceans today. I said they ruled the oceans for millions, hundreds of millions of years, and they were incredibly successful, abundant creatures. Can we go back to the projector, please? I've got another fossil here, another one I've got in Madagascar, which is a similar thing that looks a little bit like the ammonite I showed you. This is also from the mid-Cretaceous, so 150 million years old. It looks a bit like an ammonite, but it's not. It's a nautiloid. It was alive in the same ocean that this fossil swam around in. But the key part of the story is that these guys, which are, again, they're Kevlar Pods, so they're the similar group of the mollusks, but they're not the same as ammonites. They were different groups. The ammonites went extinct 65 million years ago, the same time as the dinosaurs. The nautiloids didn't. And their descendants are alive today in the form of, can we go back to the slides? Form of chambered nautiluses. So I've got a shell of a chambered nautilus here, which is beautiful. And these are creatures that live today in the deep ocean. And this is a fossil nautiloid from 150 million years ago. So they're just fantastic creatures that are still alive. But sadly, the ammonites didn't make it. And if you would have bet on which group it was that would survive this mass extinction that happened 65 million years ago, my money would have been on the ammonites, actually, because there were so many of them. They were incredibly diverse. And there weren't so many species of nautiloid, they were called at the time, these guys. But they're the survivors. And again, there's theories about why this might be. It could be that we know that the ammonites had very tiny babies. They were called ammonitella, very, very cute little tiny babies that these guys had. These had bigger babies. Perhaps they were better able to survive the impacts of that mass extinction, which we think was linked to this asteroid slamming into Mexico. And it's also that the nautiloids live deeper down in the ocean, so possibly they were protected from some of the effects of this mass extinction. But these are the ones that are still alive today. Now, I'm going to quickly zip on, I think, through a lovely group of animals, mollusks. That if I'm ever asked what my favourite mollusks are, I always say these guys. It's hard to choose. There's 200,000 species of mollusk, but the Argonauts are the ones that I say are my favourites. Their other name is paper nautilus. They aren't actually that closely related to the chambered nautilus, but their shells look a little similar. They're much lighter and they feel like they're papery, but they are still calcium carbonate. Here's a little video of an Argonaut. The reason I think they're wonderful is that these are the only these are the only octopus that make shells. So it's a tiny little octopus, a silvery little octopus that lives inside a shell. And they are wonderful, beautiful things. They live in the open seas. And lots of stories have been told about Argonauts. One is that for a long time, scientists thought, this isn't an Argonaut shell, but it's like this. But they thought that what the Argonauts did was that they sailed along the surface of the sea using their shells as boats, and that they stuck their arms in the air as sails and drifted around in the breeze. They don't do that. But that was the story that was told. This is a picture from the book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, and he described. And at the time, it's what scientists really did think, that they used their shells as boats. And the other big question is whether Argonauts make their own shells or whether they steal them from other animals. And for a long time, there was this big scientific debate about, do Argonauts make shells or do they find another animal and nick their shell and swim off with it? And it was this wonderful lady, Jean Villepreux-Power, a French lady who finally figured out the answer to this question. And that's another reason I love this story of Argonauts, is because she's kind of a forgotten pioneer of marine biology. She invented the aquarium to study these animals, and she did work out that, yes, Argonauts do make their own shells. They don't steal them. They're not pirates. They make shells, but they do it in a completely different way to the other mollusks. They don't use their mantle, but they do use two of their arms. So you can just see in this picture, that kind of open sort of flappy bit that could maybe look like an ear. And that's the modified end to one of the arms of the Argonaut. And they use that to make their shells. So that's how they kind of create their shell, with the ends of their arms. And this is the female. It's only the females that make shells. They use them to keep their babies in. The males don't. So the Argonauts are a wonderful group of mollusks, the only octopus that do indeed make their own shells. Now, my final group of mollusks that I want to introduce you to this evening are these guys, another illustration of creatures called sea butterflies. Kind of maybe my second best mollusk, I guess, if I had to choose. These are sea snails, tiny, tiny little sea snails that live in the open sea. So similar sort of place to the Nautiluses and the Argonauts. They live in the open sea, but they're really small. They count as part of the plankton. They really are microscopically small. But they have these beautiful shells. Some of them are spiraling. And actually, they've been compared to the golden snitch in Harry Potter because they have these round shells, and instead of, as normal, most snails have a single foot which they slide around on the seabed. But these guys have split their feet into two little wings, and they flit and fly through the open sea. So in a way they do fly, but not in the air, they fly through the sea. And so they've been called the golden snitch. I think it's rather wonderful. Now, I went to Gran Canaria recently to go and try and find some sea butterflies, and this is what we did to catch them. You send down a plankton net, which is that white thing that's we'll see it again coming up, and you drop it down into the water, and as you pull it back up, it's a cone with a very fine mesh that collects any tiny creatures in the water. And as you pull it back up through the water column, they all tumble down into that cone and get collected in the bottom. And you'll see in a second, that orange pot at the bottom is where we collect all the plankton that we've been sifting through with that big net. And then we took that back, the contents of that pot, back to the lab and spent long hours looking at it down on a microscope because these things are really tiny, and to see if we could find any sea butterflies. So there we go. We did that many times over and then took our barrel of water back to the lab. And here's a bit of footage. It's not great. This is my camera down a microscope. And you can just see there's little golden creatures fluttering a little bit, so hopefully at the bottom there, in the middle there. And those were the sea butterflies. We did find some really tiny, beautiful creatures. Now, there are other tiny mollusks related to sea butterflies that also live in the open sea. And these ones don't have shells, and they are called the sea angels. And here's a little footage of the sea angels. But I should warn you before I show you this. And I just realized that this is all going down a similar path of some of the things I've shown you already tonight. There's going to be some predation. Don't be fooled by the sea angels' angelic appearance. They do look like little angels. They've got these they've got little ears, and they've got their little wings as well, and no shells. They look like little angels flying through the sea. But they're voracious predators, and they hunt for sea butterflies. And this is a piece of footage from Japan of it. This is the sea angel. Doesn't it look cute? Yeah. But wait till the sea butterfly comes along. There's a sea butterfly, and the sea angel, this is slow motion, the sea angel has got these tentacles, and basically it's just going for the sea butterfly. And what they will do is, when they get a hold of them, they will pull the sea butterflies out of their shells and eat them. So they are amazing, amazing predators to watch in slow motion. So that's the battle of sea angels and sea butterflies going on in the ocean all the time. But sea butterflies don't only have sea angels to be scared of these days. There's another big problem that they are going to face quite soon, and that's because of us humans and the stuff that we're putting into the air. I'm talking about a side effect of climate change that we don't often hear about. The gas carbon dioxide, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is produced when we burn fossil fuels like coal and oil and gas. And it acts as a greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, trapping the sun's solar radiation and making the world warmer. But a lot of that carbon dioxide that we put into the air doesn't stay in the atmosphere. About a third of all the carbon dioxide humans have ever made ends up being absorbed into the oceans. So in a way, we have the oceans to thank, because climate change would already be much, much worse if it hadn't been for all of that gas that was being absorbed into that huge ocean that I showed you, covering 7/10 of the planet. The problem is, though, that carbon dioxide doesn't just sit there unnoticed. It does some things to the oceans which could make life for sea butterflies a little difficult in the years to come. Now, to explore this and the problems sea butterflies might face, I'm going to need a volunteer from the audience. It's going to be very difficult for me to choose because I think there's only going to be one of you. One hand did go up there very quickly. Would you like to come down? Come on. Sorry, everyone else. We can only have to choose the one. So, and you've checked with your parents. That's all right, is it? Yes? Fantastic. Thank you. So, what we're going to look at first. You come down here. Hi. What's your name?
Samantha.
Samantha, thank you very much for helping me out. Now, first of all, what we want to do is show the effect of carbon dioxide on seawater. Now, we have a great source of carbon dioxide in our lungs because we breathe in with about 0.04% of carbon dioxide, but when we breathe it out, it's like 100 times more concentrated. So the air we exhale is full of carbon dioxide. And I'm going to use the carbon dioxide inside you to see what happens to the pH of the water that we've got here. Now, in these jars, I've got just normal tap water with an indicator in which will show how acidic or alkaline that water is. And what I want you to do is take a normal drinking straw. I will do the same with the other one. I would like you to blow bubbles, so exhale into that and see what happens. I'll have a go with this one. It may take a little while, but let's see what we can do. Ooh, I think yours is changing already. Hang on, let me put the white paper underneath and we can see. Yes, excellent, because compared to my one, which I only just started, it's definitely gone a bit more red, hasn't it? Now that means it is getting more acidic, and I can prove that with a bit of actual acid. This is just vinegar. I'm going to pop a bit of that in mine, and it should go a similar sort of colour. So this has just got an indicator in it, which I say, which shows the pH of the water. It's definitely changed colour, hasn't it? And I think yours did too. I think if we carried on, we'd get it to be even stronger. So what's happening there is essentially the carbon dioxide that you're breathing out is reacting with the water and essentially turning it to acid. If anyone's interested in what's happening chemically, this is it. So you've got carbon dioxide, CO2 plus H2O, the water. You get H2CO3, and ultimately that breaks down. And the important thing there is that proton, the H plus, the hydrogen ion, and that's what's causing the water to be more acidic. Now, we know this is happening in the oceans today. We know that since the Industrial Revolution, 200 years ago, the oceans have become 30% more acidic than they used to be. And if things continue, by the end of the century, the oceans could be 150% more acidic than they were. Now, this is a problem for creatures like these mollusks and all our seashells that live inside calcium carbonate. Because, as we'll see, calcium carbonate doesn't do too well when it comes to acidic water. Now, we're going to do a bit of a demonstration, again with my vinegar over here. So if you want to come around this side, I'm going to see what happens when we put some calcium carbonate into a mild acid, just some nice household vinegar. It smells a bit, but if you want to come over here, we'll see. I'm not going to put one of the shells in here, because I think the museum, again, is going to be a bit cross with me if I end up doing things, as you shall see, with shells. We have got a shell substitute in the form of a hen's egg. These are also made of calcium carbonate, just a regular hen's egg. These ones are free range, so that's okay. And what I'd like you to do is, if you could take the egg and gently lower it in, hopefully it won't snap, it won't crack, into the vinegar. Excellent, there we go. That's it. Now, can we see what's happening straight away there?
It's bubbling.
It's bubbling, isn't it? So we're getting bubbles already forming on the outside of this hen's egg. Can we flip over to the projector, please? Let's see if we can have a look in there and see what's going on. Yeah, so you can see that there are little bubbles forming on the outside of that egg. Now, here's one I made earlier. We've got a couple of eggs that we put in malt vinegar, so it's brown, but same stuff. So it's a mild acid, just a normal mild acid we've got. We put these in a couple of days ago. And I think we're going to have to come around here, actually. Let's go back around this side, so in case it's messy. Right. So we put these eggs into vinegar about a day and a half ago. And what I would like you to do, if you're feeling brave, is to pull one out. I have got a glove if you would like to wear it, or are you happy? Good stuff. So if you could just reach in and pull one out and tell us what you find.
It feels all squishy.
It is, it's very squishy. Perhaps I'll do the same with this one. And I'll leave these out, so if anyone wants to come and have a look at them afterwards, they're completely, in fact, you can drop it on the desk. Bonk. Can you see that?
Like a bouncy ball.
It's like a bouncy ball. Messy, gross. There you go. Fantastic. So what has happened? I'll give you here you go. There we are. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Samantha. Excellent. Thank you. So what's happened there is we have basically removed the shell from the outside of those eggs. The calcium carbonate outer layer of those hen's egg have completely dissolved. And we can see it beginning already as soon as you put the egg in the acid here. Those bubbles are actually little bubbles of carbon dioxide, again, kind of ironically. That's what's happening because the shell is dissolving in the acid and turning into carbon dioxide and calcium, which you get in the water. And the jelly eggs are formed, basically the membrane on the inside of the eggs is all that's keeping it together without the shell on the outside. Yeah, I know, it's pretty smelly, isn't it? Sorry. Perhaps I'll put the lids back on. There we go. If anyone wants to come and play later, they'll still be here. So this is an effect that's happening in the ocean called ocean acidification. As I say, the ocean's already much more acidic than they used to be because of all of this carbon dioxide that we're making. And the question is, how is this going to affect all of these creatures, the mollusks that so many of them live inside calcium carbonate shells? And studies are being done, all sorts of research is being looked into this, and it's a kind of a mixed picture. Some mollusks do seem to be able to survive a certain level of acidification. Studies do things like take mollusks that are still alive, take snails, put them into aquaria with water that's had carbon dioxide bubbled through them. So you remember we did the study earlier with the Crown-of-Thorns and the water that was passed over a triton. They're doing the similar sorts of things, but with water that's got lots of CO2 in it. And it's showing that some mollusks can survive, they can grow thicker shells, and they can adapt to this dissolution, this shells breaking down. But not all of them do, and some definitely do suffer when it comes to this increased levels of acidity. And sadly, it's the sea butterflies, which seem to be the ones that are likely to be kind of in the firing line of ocean acidification, incredibly sensitive to this kind of thing. Can we go back to the slides, please? So this is a little video clip of a living, healthy sea butterfly. Again, think of golden snitches. Off it goes. Very fast swimming. It's got this beautiful transparent shell, nicely intact, and it seems to be fairly happy and swimming quite well. The next one, and these videos are from a researcher, Nina Bednarski, Bednarczyk, who's doing these studies of ocean acidification. Now this is a sea butterfly that's been exposed to high levels of CO2 and more acidified waters. And you can see that its shell is all kind of scratched and broken, and it's just not doing very well at all with the swimming too. And Nina's going out, and lots of other people too, but she's been doing studies in the open ocean, finding places in the sea where there's naturally high CO2. You get areas of the ocean where there's sort of upwellings happen and there's higher CO2 levels. And she's finding that naturally some of these sea butterflies are having problems with their shells. So we're projecting forwards and thinking about how in the future life really could become quite difficult for sea butterflies. And it really does matter, and beyond the fact that they're beautiful creatures and all of this is very wonderful, but sea butterflies are very important food for other animals. They're very abundant naturally, and they make food for birds and whales and other fish and things. So they really are an important part in the ocean ecosystem. And if ocean acidification means they're going to start dying out, then we kind of do have problems ahead. Now, I don't want to finish on a glum note. So after our tour of the mollusks and looking at some of the wonderful discoveries as well as the problems in the mollusk world, I just want to end with some high notes. I'm going to take you back to the scaly foot gastropods, those wonderful creatures we see in the deep sea. And some of the new discoveries that we're finding in the whole mollusk group that are helping people to find new inspirations for new things. I mentioned that the scaly foots have these shells made of iron, and they have incredibly strong shells, and we think this is for their defense against being squashed by crabs and other creatures down in the deep sea. And engineers are now looking at these scaly foot snails and how they make their shells to inspire the next generation of really strong materials like cars and spacecraft and body armor, things like that. So we're finding out wonderful things from the mollusk world. There's loads of great discoveries going on. And finally, back to our friend the Blu Ray Limpet, this beautiful creature that you can find. And you can go and find these if you go to the beach and look amongst the big seaweeds. So you wait for the tide to go right out. You can find these big seaweeds living down at the low tide. And you might find these tiny little limpets sort of eating themselves a little hole. This is the picture I took of it sitting in the stem of a seaweed, and they chew a hole and live in it. And some other great inspirations are coming from these mollusks. The blue stripes on their back turn out to be a complex structure in their shells that creates that blue color. It's not that they make light. They don't have their own light-producing abilities, although some creatures do. But what they're doing is that it's the way the light bounces off those shells. It's a bit like the way sound bounces inside these trumpet shells and the tritons. Light bounces around on those bits of the blue light. The zigzag, nanoscale zigzags inside their shells, as engineers have found out, which is why they have these beautiful blue stripes. And they think that this could inspire the next generation of things like heads-up displays or Google glasses, things like that. You know, the sort of, you put a pair of glasses on and it projects an augmented reality around you, or puts a map on the front screen of your car as you're driving. All sorts of crazy high-tech ideas and innovations could come from these beautiful, but really quite humble snails that live around our coasts. So there's tons of wonderful things we're still discovering, and who knows what else we might find next. So thank you all very much for listening. Oops, let's go back to that. Oh no, now you know my screensaver. I'm going to put this. If anyone is a Snoopy fan, I'd love to come chat afterwards. Thank you all so much for listening. Oh, we've done it again. Okay.
Why haven't octopuses evolved to grow shells?